Welcome everyone. Today we have our another new episode, and this is our 482 episodes, and we will discuss on ESG, but definitely we do focus on water because next month, March 22, we have a International Water Day, and World Talent Economy Forum actually collaborate with Rotary Club of India as well as there are many government officials and the corporation. They're going to join with us, and definitely we have our climate change expert, Mr. Marshall, and Professor David Smith, and all of our experts. Definitely, they're going to join in our event, and hopefully, we can take some practical action for this water day. So today, I want to give chance and floor to Mr. Marshall for sharing his view about water purification.
Thank you, Sharif. Hopefully everyone can hear me. So today, in our series of Getting Serious on the Climate Crisis, we're talking about cleaning polluted water into a life-sustaining resource. And that is very important for the developing world. So if we could go to our topics, Sharif, which is the next slide. So the topics that we're going to be addressing today is what is the challenge with water? It's obviously water pollution. And we will be discussing toxic waste, heavy metals, dead zones in water, what causes that. And then we will address a solution, the solution, which is revitalizing water treatment. ART has a multitude of technologies when combined together addresses this. But we will be focusing today's session on biochar filtration and returning oxygen to the water. And then the last part of today's session, we'll be addressing issues on the public-private partnerships. How do sovereign entities, what are their opportunities to participate with the groups such as ours and others? And in that regard, David Smith will address some of these issues. So first, I want to hand off to Mark Sabin, who, if you've seen previous sessions on our series, you'll have recognized Mark. Mark is very well versed in a lot of the issues of pollution and how to address it. We've also got today with us ART and ARB's Chief Operating Officer, Russ Michael, who also has extensive background in water. So Mark, I hand it off to you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Marshall. If we could go to the next slide, Sharif. We're really looking at a couple of different aspects of the water issue and what we can do, particularly in treating water that is now being consumed in various forms that's getting into the water table. And one of the chief things that's happened globally has been the increased use of chemical fertilizers, which have now actually supporting the life of these toxic algal blooms and harmful algal blooms. And so we're seeing now throughout a lot of the shorelines and oceans and lakes and rivers, significant blooms of these algae infestations that are actually keeping life from actually doing its natural process of cleaning the water. So in the best of all worlds, where we're not dealing with a lot of environmental issues, we could actually see water that could be being cleaned through the natural process. But what's happened now is because of the amount of pollutants that are getting into the water, we're seeing what's known as eutrophication. And eutrophication is a significant problem because what it is it's the decomposing organic materials that are in the water that are now being processed and being able to draw the oxygen out of the water because they're being fed by things such as the phosphorus. So part of the solution that the BioArt solution that we're talking about today involves several steps. One of the steps that we want to talk about is there's a filtration medium that we're using biochar. So we take waste streams, organic waste streams that are high in carbon and can create filtration. The filtration that is made out of the biochar, because of its porosity, because it acts very much like a sponge would, and is actually able to absorb the materials that are things like phosphorus. We use a different type of char depending on how we manufacture it, but we can extract things like heavy metals out of the water. And so in the treatment process, we stage various forms of filtration that are then to take out these pollutants. And in the case of heavy metals and in the case of phosphorus, those biochars that are now filled with these various, either whether it's the phosphorus or the heavy metals, can now be recharged, and we can actually harvest the heavy metals, and those can be used for other purposes. And we can take the phosphorus and we can use that as the basis for another composition that can become soil amendments and fertilizers that can be used and that actually have long-term effects in terms of absorbing water, reducing the amount of water that's being used. Now, there are a number of different aspects to what happens in this process. So one of the things is that a major problem that we see in water treatment areas is the odors associated with water treatment. And one of the advantages of using these carbonized materials that are made out of the organic waste is that those things actually begin to eliminate the water treatment odors. And in addition to that, as you're using those and you're harvesting the biosolids and you're making them into char, you're also reducing the amount of waste that's going in, and you're reusing the waste. So you're upcycling what you have in terms of waste, repurposing it to do something that mitigates some of the pollution issues and actually turns that situation around. So you're not only dealing with the odors that are happening in the water treatment plant, you're also beginning to make new materials, so that what that does is it transitions what was a formerly something that's a very cost intensive operation to filter and clean the water, now is producing materials that can now be used to offset some of the costs and actually can generate profits for them. So the other thing that we do is that after we create these materials, we also have another technology that actually oxygenates the water. So we want to bring, because what supports life is oxygen. We need those two things. We need water, but we also need oxygen. And oxygen depleted water really is just a feeding ground for these problems that we're seeing around the world, particularly in the developing world. But even where I am here in New York State, we're seeing in ponds, in lakes, in rivers, we're seeing vast dead zones that are actually having a very, very significant impact on the health and well-being of the people. So one of the things that we want to do is be able to use these materials in order to do that. And that is where I'd like to be able to get Russ Michael in the conversation at this point, because he has spent a long part of his career actually dealing with water issues and understands the filtration process and can probably share a few enlightening points with us in this conversation. Russ? You're muted.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Marshall. Yes, water filtration, and actually the whole notion of water gets pretty interesting, and it's a very deep conversation. Ideally, the whole purpose is to get first to get the particulate out, and once we can get the particulate out, then there's all the chemical issues and also the biological issues. And Art has assembled an interesting array of technologies that speaks to all of these issues. Of course, the first part of it is getting the particulate out, and we all know about sand filters. That's the easiest thing to do, but there are other particulate and combined filtration media that we can use to speak to that issue. What used to really worry me is when you would get a biologist in there and he would say things like, as best we can tell at this point in time. That makes everybody kind of do an eye roll. But we've gotten a handle on that, and we have a vast array of media and technology that speaks to this issue, that can produce water that's suitable for agriculture, for animal feeding animals, and all the way down to entering it into the water stream, which I believe to be a very important part in the third world community. So, and the trick is to being able to scale up, which is what art has been able to do. We can scale up and we can speak to this in depth and purify the water.
Russ, there are different, in terms of the medium that you would use. So one of the things on the current slide that's up there, we're talking about the biochar. So biochar is one level of the filtration, but how would you get, if the biochar is taking out the heavy metals and maybe it's taking out the phosphorus, is there another level of filtration that you need to actually consider?
Well, biochar takes out the heavy metals, and as you said, but it's actually it's taking out everything else when it can, and then you can add in you can plumb in line a copper zinc, which will actually even remove chlorine from the water. And that's what they're using in municipal water supplies on top of high skyscrapers as the final treatment. So again, it's removing particulate, and the particulate can be in the form of things that are floating in the water that aren't really visible in the eye. The whole trick is to get it down to the micron level. And you can use ground glass, surgical ground glass to further trap it. And you can use a cartridge filter. You know, the DE has fallen out of favor because it's a carcinogen, and handling it can be an issue. But there's a whole host of ways that you can, depending on what you're going after. Ultimately, much of it is a filtration system, and it's reducing the size of the sieve, and to trap this stuff out, to get it out. And then the last part of it is also how you're going to address any organisms still alive in there and still make it reasonably safe. I spoke to one person here in the States, and he said, the trick is, how do we treat it, and how do we keep contaminants out of it? In the third world, water can kill you in 3 years. In the first world, if it's not done right, water can kill you in 35 years. So it's always a balance. It's always a balance, and it's always changing. It's always changing because our targets are always evolving. I don't know if that makes any sense.
No, that's really helpful. And part of the solution is once those particulate matters are out, then we are able to actually take it to the next level. So then at that point, we start to deal with some of the other issues that ART has that will be part of what we're going to have in some of our other conversations. But the key here is that we're talking about this material known as biochar, commonly known as biochar. And biochar is made from organic materials. Organic waste could be woody biomass, it could be agricultural waste. We know that in a lot of the developing world, a lot of these waste sources are simply being incinerated. They're being burned, and they're adding to the level of pollution in the air and the water. And to be able to interrupt this whole process, we need to be able to put in systems that can actually, as Russ was saying, at a scalable level, actually start to address the problem. And I think one of the things that is really key to this is well, how is a developing world, how is a sovereign nation going to be able to actually implement these kinds of solutions? And I think this is where the public-private partnerships that David Smith knows about is really key to being able to understand how we can move this forward, because ART is being able to present a solution that can be implemented. Now the question is, how do we actually get the implementation done?
Mark, before David goes on, I'd like to just interject an example that is critical in that has been seen that both you and Russ have been discussing before we hand it off to David, and that is in India alone. We know that they harvest a lot of rice, and the rice hulls or rice husks, what they do with them is they burn them, and it causes huge amounts of smog and pollution in the area. And the question is, what do you do with that? A lot of systems prior to the one that we've developed would take these systems and would convert a lot of it into what's called clinkers. Clinkers are simply pieces of silica, because rice has a lot of silica in it chemically, and people don't know what to do with it. The beauty of it is we have systems that get rid of the clinkers, but if we wanted to, we could actually take the clinkers and convert that into glass, because clinkers are essentially beads of glass. And as a 16-year-old, I worked in my father's glass factory, and we actually took clinkers and we put them and melted them and created panes of glass out of it. But I think you're right, Mark. The critical issue is, how do we structure this? And I'd like to pass this off to David in terms of the private-public partnership.
Marshall, thank you so much for that. This type of solution is one of the places where governments are really struggling today in how to put efficient solutions together. And one of the ways to do it is to set up the public-private partnership. As you can see on the slide, that there's over $100 trillion of public investment moving to the whole green environment and how to do it. Even the market for funds has been exploding with new legislation in the EU and in UK and places directed towards this, that is going to simplify putting public-private partnerships together. Let's go to the next one. And see, this is kind of what you begin to do. The public-private partnerships really help you put in place the group of stakeholders and the transparency that's required to move across the bridge for this funding. There's a lot of support by sovereign banks, large funding organizations, and others who really put together, and there's a new model coming together where this is really necessary to support this going together. But public-private partnerships bring together the stakeholders, the people doing the work, the contractors there, the primes, the subs, the government, and in many instances, others in the community, because you have to build the capabilities to sustain these. So, for example, here in the United States, we involve a lot of our community colleges, a lot of our colleges, and our workforce training institutes in pulling together the resources, because one of the goals of public-private partnerships isn't just to fund it, just to build it, but to make it sustainable. And particularly as we look at this whole environment around ESGs, that's very, very important going forward. So at a high level, that's kind of where it is. And, we can answer questions going down the road about them. So Marshall, back to you.
Thank you, David. So one of the things that David mentioned is this bridge that we're showing up there now. In order to do it, I just want to go back a step. So, Sharif, if you go to the next slide, what you see here there are lots of different carbon removal technologies. Some of them are more amenable than others. Some are more popular than others. But our approach and our issue is that we need to educate people, as David said. And that's why we believe that the World Talent Economic Forum plays a great role in this part. We know that the World Talent Economic Forum is training people in Rwanda, 100 women. I believe in other countries, they're going to take on the responsibility to train others in different aspects about the climate crisis. And understanding climate removal technologies and what their advantages are and disadvantages are really critical. And so if we go to the next slide, what we see is the outcome.
Before you go on to that next slide, Marshall, I just wanted to make the point that if we go back to that previous slide, one of the things that's so important about the carbon removal technologies is not only that you're removing the carbon from the atmosphere, but what we're talking about in terms of water is we're actually using that material that's pulling the carbon out of the atmosphere to use that to clean the water. And that's a really
excellent. That's a key point, Mark, especially in today's session and the upcoming sessions on water. So yes, there is a convergence, I would say, of understanding that different technologies have different benefits, but in the case of water, we do know that the concept that Mark spoke about and Russ spoke about, filtration media, is really important in cleaning water. You can get water to the point where it cleans up, to the point where you get rid of the harmful algal blooms, and it makes the water, people could swim in it eventually, and hopefully fish can swim in it, and other aquatic species. But more important, it can also be made with other technologies to become at least potable water, water that's drinkable. And that's really important in places such as Africa, Southeast Asia, and the other developing country world. So yes, the carbon removal technologies are really important, Mark, and I totally agree with you. And it's all, the focus here is which of these technologies will actually benefit the improvement of water as well as soil and air. Sharif, you go to the next slide. So what this brings us to is what David Smith was talking about, and that is the public-private partnerships. When they work together and they are effective, we are able to meet the 17, we can attempt to meet the 17 Sustainability Development Goals offered by the UN, by the United Nations, which I think every country in the world has signed on to. The good news for us is that together with other partners and partnering up with the World Talent Economic Forum, we want to bring the fact that we meet already currently 14 of the 17 SDGs, the Sustainability Development Goals. There's obviously a short-term, a mid-term, and a long-term outcome of meeting these goals. Our mechanism, working with in a private-public partnership in that bridge that David showed earlier, is that we recommend using the climate bonds of the EU. Why? Because the climate bonds are funded by investors in the Luxembourg Green Exchange, and the money doesn't have to come from the third world partners. They just act as guarantors to bring the bond to market. Once the bond is in market, there's no outcome, no output other than maybe some money that is used, discretionary money that's used for educating their population and through people such as the World Talent Economic Forum, and also making sure that people are up to speed on all the latest technologies that are out there. But working together as a team, that is really critical. It's important to note that for the developing world, all these sustainability development goals are local. They're local in their location or your location, whoever's watching this program today. And ultimately, our goal is long-term outcome, and that long-term outcome is to align the 17 SDGs that will benefit people having clean water, potable water, water that can be used in agriculture and can be used with livestock and with humans. And that's a really critical component of it. At this point,
there's another thing, Marshall, that you're addressing in terms of the climate bonds, and that is there needs to be a movement, a capital movement of financial capabilities from the developed world into the developing world. And in order to do that, there has to be viable returns. And I think this is something that we heard earlier on earlier broadcasts from Don Carley, who was talking about how this movement of taking these climate bonds, which are being sponsored, in, as you said, in Luxembourg, but they're bringing money and capital investment into the third world. The reason that they can do that is because there are viable opportunities for the investors to actually see the benefits. So the benefits, and this really goes to Sharif's very important motivation for what this whole World Economic Forum is about, which is about addressing the needs of people. And so part of what the key here is that each of these levels that we're talking about, whether it's dealing with the pollution, with dealing with waste, with cleaning water, and with bringing money into the areas where these kind of investments need to be made, are all the movement that actually is taking place and transpiring now through this mechanism that allows the public-private partnerships that David was talking about, that allows the filtration mediums to be installed, is what Russ was talking about, and to do all the things that you're talking about in terms of being able to serve the developing world in a way that actually is going to be changing and supporting the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and also mitigating some of the issues we're dealing with climate and the climate crisis that we're facing right now.
Thanks, Mark. That is totally on the money. I would say we're now open to the discussion segment, which would be the next slide. The question is, will sovereign banks back climate bonds to unleash P3s and achieve SDGs? And we believe they can, and they should. We know the good news is that there's no risk to them. We've come up with a mechanism that mitigates the risk to them and as guarantors. And the best part of it is there is the return on investment for the climate bond holders, which we know can be done profitably. But there's also discretionary funds that could be used by the sovereigns to help motivate the education of their population in the areas of water treatment, water improvement, as well as other environmental issues. So at this point, Sharif, if you have any questions or anybody else has any questions, we'll be more than happy to answer them.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. This is really great presentation, and hopefully we can work together for the developing nations. One thing, as you are discussing about public-private partnership, this whole ecosystem with your projects, is only for macro initiative, or it also helpful for micro initiative? Let's say in developing worlds, there is a small village, maybe 1 to 5,000 people live in a tiny village. They also can get this kind of support, or how does it work? I'm more interested about micro initiative, like this green bond and your technology work in the micro initiative.
Yes, that's an excellent question, Sharif. The good news is that it works both at the macro level and the micro level. And the way we've done it right now is, in order to make it work at the micro level, what we do is we form joint ventures because that's a requirement under the taxonomy, and I've used that word before. The taxonomy are the rules of the climate bond to prevent greenwashing from occurring, but also allowing us to scale up at the same time at the micro level. So to give you an example, right now, currently, we have 7 joint ventures, none of them in Europe. And the 7 joint ventures, each one on and of its own wouldn't justify a climate bond. But by combining them, we can justify a single climate bond and distribute the funds accordingly. So to give you an example, if you had a village of 4,000 people and you had, I just pick any country, there's lots of countries in the third world that have more than one village, and you wouldn't just pick one village, you'd pick a whole host of villages to help them treat their water and improve their life cycle on that. So the answer would be, what we do is we band together as many villages as possible. Not that they would all work together necessarily, they would all be doing their own thing, but they would all be addressing their issues of water. So for instance, you might have a village that has harmful algal blooms that need to be treated. You might have another village that who has doesn't have that problem, but they have polluted waters in the aquifers. How do they treat that? So all the same technologies that we bring to the table can address all these issues. But the beauty of it is it can be done village by village, group by group, and address it on an ongoing basis.
In fact, it's one of the conversations that we're currently involved with in Nigeria to discuss being able to put a group of women-run villages that have resources that they need to actually deal with. So one of the major issues is how do you contend with the waste issues? And that's the conversion process that we've talked about, where you convert the waste into usable materials. And then what Marshall's talking about is that now how do you deploy those usable materials into the areas where they're needed, where you have water that is collected that may be having issues that you want to address that. So by doing this under the climate bond opportunity, what that allows you to do is to reach multiple fingers. It becomes like it has multiple tentacles. It can reach in to resolve these different issues depending on what the local issues are. So it does address that, but it also has to it contends with it in a way that is at a scalable level, so that it actually is creating enough material that you can actually begin to address the solutions and to supply the materials for the solutions that you need to address the local issues. It's a little bit of a circular kind of concept, but it's very important, and it addresses exactly what your question is about, Sharif.
Thank you. And what about this public-private partnership when it's go for this micro initiative? So these projects, how does it work for? Is it public-private partnership, or it's for individual organizations or collaboration with small medium enterprise?
So David, why don't you address that one for us?
I was going to say, you can do public-private partnerships in quite a few different scales. And some of the bonds are applicable for both places. Plus, if you look at the target initiatives in places like funds coming out of the World Bank and the International Development Bank, and even places like USAID and some of the EU aid monies, they target the small ones as well. And so there's a multiple ways put together. But one of the challenges, particularly on the micro ones, is people want to see transparency. And that is where the public-private partnerships really help with that. If you look at the annual reports from some of the funding groups like IDB, they're very concerned with a lot of their grants going into areas like this with the amount that are not actually applied to the projects. And public-private partnerships really help solve that problem.
Now, one thing, just this area I want to clear. Let's say different country has different culture. Example, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, almost same. Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, China, different. Here, government take lot of initiative. India, private organizations. Bangladesh, private organization take lot of initiative. So when you are discussing about two things, number one, transparency. Number two, you are discussing about public-private partnerships. So how do you ensure this transparency in different country? Let's say, what about India? How you want to implement in India?
So a good answer to that is the beauty of the mechanism that David showed in that bridge, where the keystone is the climate bond issuance process. What it does is the funds, the Indian government doesn't have to put up the funds. That's the beauty of it, because people are concerned. What happens to the money, right? That's what David was addressing. So when the funds come through a climate bond, and the climate bond holds your feet to the fire, as they say, that expression, what happens is you have to follow a very strict taxonomy to prevent greenwashing and to make sure that the funds are used as required. And the beauty of it is a public marketplace like the Luxembourg Green Exchange will have its eyes focused exactly on where that money goes. You need to have audit trail of where every penny of those euros that are expended go. And when you do it as a public-private partnership, as David pointed out, there's a lot of mechanisms that we can implement to help us track those funds and make sure that the money is going in the right direction and to the right people. And one of the aspects of that is also, by the way, Sharif, I believe, is it's not enough just for the education of the local population about the technology and how it's applied. I think it's also important to educate the people of what their enlightened self-interest is. In other words, when the money goes to create good quality jobs, and that improves the lifestyle and the level of the population, that will also help incur greater transparency. We've seen that in other parts of the world when it's done properly, especially through the Climate Bond Initiative. And so, by the way, the Climate Bond is the only bond that is rated by Fitch, Moody, and Morningstar. The others are not. There's green bonds, there's ESG bonds, there's social responsibility bonds. They're not rated. Why? Because they don't have that strict taxonomy. Now, I know there's been recent in the news about the European taxonomy. Should it include hydrogen? Should it include nuclear? That may or may not be the case in the EU, but the climate bond, though it's part of the EU, has its own taxonomies, and they're the ones that we need to follow. That will answer the question and keep our feet to the fire, and it will also allow the Indian government to be able to go out to its public and say, look, this is what we're doing for you, and if you follow this, we will be transparent through the Climate Bond Initiative process, and you'll be able to read and see what's happening to these funds. And you'll know it because we're going to be creating jobs in their locales. So as an example, in Bangladesh or India or Pakistan, as you said, that's one cultural aspect. But there's also in Vietnam and Thailand and other countries, different cultural aspects. Each of these approaches have to attenuate, meaning they have to adapt to the local population. You just, taking the money and just throwing it at a problem is not the solution. You have to bring the money, the people, the educational assets, and the public-private partnership connections to the table, as David pointed out, and so that we can solve the problems. In this case, water filtration, as Michael has discussed and Mark has discussed, on how to solve the water problems. Without water, it doesn't matter what you do with the money. You have nothing. You might as well be on Mars. You have no planet. So we need to solve these problems. We have a climate crisis where time is of the essence and water is a big issue. And in fact, we hope in the next several segments with you, Sharif, to discuss other technological aspects that we bring to the table and some of those educational components that we need to address in a public-private partnership with the technology that it's available today in the here and now. As you like to say, Sharif, we need to be practical now, not a year from now, not 10 years from now, not in the next decade. We need to be practical now. People in India and Bangladesh and in other developing parts of the world in Africa, they need help now. And we need to act and step up to the plate to do that. So that's basically our approach.
We're seeing that more and more as well. I mean, there's not a day that goes by that we're not hearing something more about what's happening in terms of the devastation of climate change and the impact that it's happening, where we're seeing officials from various island nations standing up to their knees in water at the podium, addressing the public and saying, here's the crisis that we're facing. So that's a big issue. And I think to your question, Sharif, one of the things we've had another guest on the program who's talked about the usage of artificial intelligence and how that can be done, so that in order to be able to manage the massive amount of change that we're talking about, there are a number of different tools that will be applied to this process so that we can actually track the data and that it can actually be managed. So that becomes another issue. And I know that you're aware of it, Sharif, but I just want to bring that into this conversation, that there are actually mechanisms and technologies that complement the solution-based things that we're talking about here today to actually manage the process.
Thank you. Mr. Rush Michael, if you want to add some points, especially for technology, like what type of technology we are using and how it will be helpful for the developing world.
Well, actually, you were interested in the micro level, and that's important. Smaller communities, we're able to scale down as well as to scale up, and we know what we're going after. There's mechanical filtration. There's sequestration. There's ion exchange, absorption. It depends again, the condition of the water, what our target is. That dictates what we would plug in line to filter that water. And once you're able to do that, everything changes. Everything changes. That is the source of life itself, other than air. But everything changes. So we are able to scale down. We're able to scale up, and we know what array of technologies needs to be put in place. And the best part is it is now. It speaks to the issue at hand, and it isn't something that's out of reach.
So Sharif, to add to what Russ is talking about, specific technologies that we'll be addressing in upcoming sessions besides biochar. As Mark and Russ have pointed out, the two major filtration media right now that we're talking about is the use of waste, which is a circular economy approach. You take waste, you convert it into biochar, organic waste, and then you use that to filter out heavy metals and organic material such as phosphorus and nitrates. And the beauty of it is they become profit centers for the local communities. So to give you an example, let's assume you had that village of 4,000 people, right? And they have water. Let's assume that their water problem is harmful algal blooms, which is caused, as Mark pointed out, by eutrophication, which is the absence of oxygen in the water from the nitrates and the NPK, the nitrates, phosphorus, and potassium. Usually potassium is gone by the time you get there, but the nitrates and the phosphorus can be taken out through these filtration media and then recycled as the basis for soil amendments for the local community. And they not only make money doing that, they also solve their water problems and they take care of their waste. Their waste is no longer waste. Their waste is a feedstock for more productive process. It's what in Europe they've decided to do has become a circular economy. In other words, move away from fossil fuels eventually and from those traditional fuels that help create pollution in the air, greenhouse gas emissions, but move to processes where you can convert waste into products. But I'm not talking about a cup or a spoon or a dress. I'm talking about products that actually reduce environmental impacts. In this case, what Russ is talking about is taking the waste, converting it into filtration media that helps clean up water. The other technologies that we have out there, by the way, is what's known as the ultra nano bubble generator, which we'll probably talk about in the next session, and as well as the EnviroProtect, which is in the United States, EPA registered, a nanotechnology that Russ has used dramatically in sand filters to make water whole. So there's a lot of things we'll be talking about in the next session. We don't want to steal from the next session, but basically those are some of the technologies that Russ has enabled and been able to help us develop and get them viable. So
part of what we're dealing with as well is that, and this is part of the sort of the fundamental undercurrents for ART and what its mission is. It's mission driven. It's not technology driven. So a lot of times what you'll see is that an organization or a company will be married to a particular technology, and that is the sole purpose of their mission. The mission here is to solve climate problems. We're actually looking at being able to restore the environment, to mitigate what's happening with the climate, climate repair and climate restoration is the goal. And that means that we're looking for multiple technologies. This is the reason that we have, Russ, Michael here to speak about that, because it's one part of the solution. The ultra nano bubble generator that Marshall mentioned is one part of the solution. We have other technologies that work in complement with these things, and the mission is to continue to find other technologies that will actually support the mission. It's not about trying to get one particular thing in place. It's actually about, let's be driven by what the solutions are to the problems that we're facing.
Excellent. This is the things I believe that it will be very helpful in this present challenging situation. And yes, if you want to overcome from these economical challenges, I think we need to create a lot of business initiative like what you are offering, this climate bond as well as this project, because now we have a lot of unemployment, economic inflation, many challenging moments. So the more we develop the project right now, it will be helpful for the nations, because more job opportunity will be create, more opportunity will create for the people. So that's why I request from our audience, the government or the corporation, you need to take more initiative right now. You have to take more business initiative. You need to develop more business right now. Otherwise, economic inflation can be very challenging for all of the nations. Even example, when we are observing USA, Germany, Japan's, these are the country has economic recessions, but the developing nation, they have 100% dependency on these developed nations. So if their economy actually has challenges, the same thing it happen in other developing nations. Already we are observing right now. So that's why I request everyone, because we want to be a very good diplomat for global science, engineering, and technologies. But definitely, we need to careful about economy. Right now, economy is a most challenging things, and we need to fix the problem. And we need to work together. We need more entrepreneurs, more organization like you, who can solve the economic problem. So hopefully it can be one of the aspects to solve this economic problem. Thank you everyone for joining today's sessions. I directly want to go for the concluding remarks. First, why I want to give chance Mr. Russ Michael.
Yes, thank you, Sharif. You know, the beauty of what art has decided to take on as a mission, as Marshall so well explained, you have the issue of the byproduct of just trying to stay alive has caused a great deal of pollution, and there are hundreds, if not years old. This is the first time we have an opportunity to speak to those. Excuse me, by taking care of the waste, producing char. Char is a very fundamental and one of the best ways to purify water, and it's also one of the best ways to use as a soil amendment and as an animal feed amendment. It all has a flow, and at every point we do not produce vast pools of waste, we eliminate it. We're training people on how to do this, and once they are able to plug into this and use these technologies, everything changes. Because when water just sits there, guess what? Everything's going to change in the water, no matter because it's constantly evolving. Like I said earlier, what worried me was, as the scientists say, as best we can tell at this point in time. Well, when it's left undone, when it's left to sit there, things will go from bad to worse. Art has the technology to change all of that.
Thank you. Professor David Smith.
Well, Sharif, thank you so much for allowing me to be part of today. future of the planet is one that we need to approach as an ecosystem problem. This is part of the solution. And in many instances, inaction has been caused by a lack of resources to accomplish it, a lack of cohesiveness to pull the stakeholders together, and the ability, the inability really to be able to put plans and programs in place around being able to bring solutions in place like what Russ was talking about. I believe what your audience has heard today is a starting point to go and work together to put uh, the funding, the plans and programs, the technology, and the partnerships in place to have a positive impact in the communities and in the nation. So I think this is a great start. So thank you, Sharif.
Thank you, Mr. Mark Sabin.
Thank you, Sharif. Thanks for hosting this. And I think on a personal level, I became involved in trying to find ways that could actually resolve some of the environmental issues long ago when my hair was darker and I was a lot younger. And it's been a long pursuit to do this and to find something and a team of people that could actually participate in finding a solution, because the key was for most of my life, everybody that was trying to do environmental work was seen as a cost to the economy. It was not helping to move the economy forward, to help people out. So every solution was really created another problem. It created an economic problem, which meant it was not viable for the people that were in the position to have the money to invest in it to make it possible. One of the things that has transpired over the last few years has been that there's now mechanisms to bring the finances into the public, and that one of the things that ART has done has actually found solutions that can now generate financial benefits along with solving the environmental problems. And it's that combination of things that makes this such a viable opportunity. And now with the advent of the climate bond and the opportunity to use the blended financing that we've talked about in previous programs, where it's actually possible for a sovereign government or for a sovereign bank to actually form the guarantee to allow this process before the issuance of the bond to go forward, so that the investors now have the confidence in making the investments and into this new technology, into these innovations, as you were saying, Sharif, to support the innovators, to support the entrepreneurs who are bringing these solutions together, and bringing people who understand how to move the specific ways of managing, people like David Smith who understand how to manage the public-private partnerships, with the scientists and with the engineers and with the business people, all coming together collectively with this opportunity to take the financial structure and move that into the developing world. This is a key moment for us to actually move this whole process forward. And so the support that you offer by having these educational programs on a weekly basis, Sharif, is doing a great benefit to being able to help move this and communicate this, because in point of fact, the real key here is to educate the people who can make the decisions to make this possible. So I thank you, and it's good to be here again.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall.
Thank you, Sharif. And I think, as you can see in today's team, from Russ to David and to Mark, we have a talented group of managers and people and knowledgeable people to work together with sovereign groups and governments, state governments, local governments, national governments, to actually create the ability to deliver the solutions that Russ was talking about. Sharif, I think one of the things that you do as a great service to everyone is to be able to help educate decision makers as well as the public that now is the time that's critical. You pointed out, and I think appropriately so, right now the first world is running into a a new economic threat of high inflation and maybe even high unemployment. The beauty of it is that we can help solve for the first world, and by combining and collaborating with third world nations through this process, we can actually lower inflation, create more jobs, create more value for people, and more consumers around the world, especially in developing countries, and bring up the level of people and their livelihoods and their quality of life. And that will enhance everybody. I'm old enough to remember when inflation rose and mortgage rates in the United States were 13%. They're at 3% right now, and people are complaining they're going to 4 or 5%. They think that's heavy inflation. So it's not like we've not seen this before. The question is, do we have the institutional memory to know what to do to overcome it? And I think what you bring to the table, Sharif, along with our team and everybody else out there that we want to collaborate with, especially the sovereigns, is that we can bring the institutional memory to bear and bring these solutions that can act now and be practical now. So we look forward to next week to being able to bring to you more solutions on treating water. And obviously, over time, we will be talking not just about water, but greenhouse gas emissions, that's air quality. We will be talking about soil health and livestock health. These are all important issues in the developing world. And they're probably critical issues for people to survive and to prosper eventually once we get these elements in place. So Sharif, we look forward to continuing this dialogue with you and with your audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. World Talent Economy Forum and School of Talent Economy, actually we are working together. Right now we are working with 3,000 students from India, especially from grassroots level. And we are trying to develop their entrepreneurial skills and knowledge. So from these 3,200 students, we will bring 10 innovative idea for 22 March program, as well as we go for open dialogue. And definitely we have a plan to go for a successful projects, as well as maybe we can solve the water related problem in India. And we need all of your support. It's a team effort. World Talent Economy Forum believe in teamwork, because individually we cannot do anything. And most important thing is that we believe in people, because people always first, and it's a people oriented organization. Definitely technology is important, investment importance, and people play the major role for all of the solutions. So hopefully with all of your initiative we can save millions of people life, and side by side we can develop a sustainable ecosystem in developing world with the help of developed world. So thank you everyone for joining today's sessions. See you next week. Thank you. Bye bye and take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Be well.
Thanks, Sharif.
Bye.
See you next week.